After touring around Ireland, we decided to take advantage of the extremely cheap airfare between European countries, especially that offered by the amazing Ryanair. The first stop along our trip was London, which was actually a bit of a disappointment. We only stayed for a day and didn't get to see much. Still, we got to ride around on the Underground, which was quite an experience.
This is a Piccadilly line service to Cockfosters.
We got off the Underground in downtown London. The first thing we saw was the London Eye, and a bunch of pigeons. Around the corner was Big Ben, which actually wasn't that impressive. And then, of course, Westminster Abbey, where we decided to stop off and check out. The British gave us some guff about filming inside the Abbey, but in true American spirit, I kind of ignored them and stuck my camera out anyway. The Abbey is home to many famous burials, such as kings and queens of England's past, as well as a lot of artists, such as Pope, Chaucer, and my personal favorite, Shakespeare. Other than a cool place for famous dead guys to hang out, Westminster Abbey is also the site of the coronation of every single king and queen of England since 1066. I tried to record as many famous tombs as I could while I was there, without getting my camera taken away by the guards, of course, and I think I did a pretty good job. I also caught some footage of what is apparently Britain's oldest door, although I'm a little curious as to how exactly anybody knows that. One of my favorite rooms in the Abbey actually had no tombs in it, but was this random large domed ceiling full of stained glass. The courtyard was also impressive, complete with the awesome Gothic flying buttresses, which you can see here, and the towers. There were a couple more interesting dead people in the nave of the Abbey, one of which was Charles Darwin, strangely enough, as well as the Unknown Warrior, and of course Sir Isaac Newton. If you've seen the Da Vinci Code, I'm sure you recognize this. After we visited the Abbey, we had had enough of London hospitality and decided to head back to our hotel. The next day, we were off on a wonderful underground train ride through the tunnel between France and London, actually underwater, and arrived in Paris. The first thing you notice about Paris is the Eiffel Tower, naturally, which is actually a lot bigger than you might think it is. It also lights up at night, as you can see, kind of like a Christmas tree. Again, if you're going to wander around Paris, especially at night, I suggest getting a map. We decided that the best and laziest way to see most of Paris was to take a boat trip down the Seine through the heart of Paris and check out what there was to check out. Along the boat trip, we got to see the backsides of a lot of buildings, as well as the original Statue of Liberty, which is quite smaller than the one we have. Ha ha. And of course, Notre Dame. We wanted to check out Notre Dame, but we didn't have time, unfortunately. Still, we got a pretty good view of it from the river. The next day, we set off again and decided to get off of our lazy feet to check out the Louvre, the world's largest museum. Again, if you've seen the Da Vinci Code, my guess is you recognize most of this. Our first goal as we entered the Louvre was to find the Mona Lisa, as I'm sure everyone does. We went down this long hallway full of art, some of which needed a little bit of explanation. This is one of my favorite paintings, where you can see angels falling from heaven down to hell. We eventually stumbled upon the Mona Lisa, which was hidden behind a UV protection layer. It actually wasn't as impressive as most people say. It's kind of small. Still, at least now I can say that I've seen it with my own eyes. The best part about the Louvre was that the entire building was a work of art, not just the stuff hanging on the walls or on the pedestals. The ceiling and architecture itself is art in its own right, and I consider much of it to be more interesting than some of the main attractions. We also caught a glimpse of the French crown jewels hidden at the end of a long hallway. One of my favorite attractions was actually the Egyptian section, which was full of Egyptian art and artifacts. Some of which was so small it could fit into the palm of your hand, but so detailed it blew your mind. And of course there's this guy, one of my favorite pieces. I don't know what he is or what he represents, but I love him. After we'd had our fill of wine and cheese in Paris, which by the way is fantastic, we boarded an overnight train to Rome. My mom was a bit claustrophobic and had problems with the train, but the rest of us had a great time, and I actually had one of the best sleeps of my life as the train rocked back and forth all night long. The sleep was so good, in fact, that some of us didn't want to get up, even after the train had stopped and we needed to get off. Silly James. Then we were in Rome, which was so full of pigeons I think my brother almost had an aneurysm. Those poor pigeons have never had to work so hard in their entire lives. The best part about Rome was walking through the streets until you came upon some random set of ruins. We happened upon these after we had gotten lost, and actually came back a few times to show others in our group who weren't with us the first time. Strangely enough, these ruins were also home to a bunch of cats. A couple of hours of wandering and we found the Pantheon. Admission was free, so we headed on in to check it out. It's actually just one giant room with a hole in the ceiling to let light in. As simple as that sounds, it's actually pretty interesting, and it held the remains of the painter Raphael. A bit of wandering later and we stumbled across the Trevi Fountain. According to tradition, if you fling a coin over your shoulder into the water, you will return to Rome at a later date. So of course we did that. The next day we sought out the Colosseum, probably the best known architecture in Rome. Unfortunately we weren't able to get inside because it was closed, although we're not sure why. From the outside though, it was pretty impressive. Our next stop was the Vatican. We'd already arranged for an American tour guide to show us around, and it was the best thing we could have possibly done. There's a lot of stuff to see here, and without some kind of context, you miss a lot. Just make sure you look up reviews of the tour guide you're getting before you hand over your money. According to ours, there are some who don't really know what they're talking about. Our tour ended with a stop at the Sistine Chapel. Unfortunately, I was not allowed to videotape in here, and unlike in London, I didn't think I could get away with it. Interestingly, the reason we were not allowed to take videos of the chapel was not because flash photography would hurt the paintings, but because a Japanese company several decades ago had paid to restore the chapel to its original glory, and therefore they held the commercial rights to it. With the tour over, we were led out into St. Peter's Basilica, which was absolutely enormous and so ornate it hurt your eyes to look at the walls. And on our way out, we caught a glimpse of the Swiss Guard. The next day, we decided to leave Rome and head on a bus tour to Pompeii, about 2 hours north. This is where we learned that you should always research your tour guide or tour company before you sign up for the tour. We had to break away because it was so bad, but still, we had a great time. Pompeii, as you might know, was covered in ashes by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius and preserved absolutely everything in almost pristine condition. The roads were completely intact and we were able to walk on them. Many of the houses were still visible, and some still even had roofs. A common feature of some of the bigger, richer houses was a pond in a courtyard in the middle. As you're walking through the streets of Pompeii, it's really difficult not to get a sense of the history and of the people that live there, including a couple that were actually preserved in ash and are visible, albeit protected behind a set of bars in the middle of the town. There was even a preserved dog, poor thing. As I mentioned before, some of the houses were so well preserved that they almost seemed fit to live in, maybe with some carpet. Some murals were even still visible on the walls. After Pompeii, we hitched a ride back to Ireland with Aer Lingus, and eventually back to the States.